Hello. So we're going to start with the introduction to the Digiscale operation and setup. As you can currently see, we're looking at a touchscreen scale. This model is the SM5300BX, where it's a full touchscreen and it has a linerless label setup. We see here we have our tare value that shows on the scale, the weight, the zero indicator, making sure that the scale platter is zeroed. If there's any fluctuation in this, like when I touch the scale, you'll see that it'll go out. When it's not zeroed, it will not log a price to be printed on a label. So that's one thing to be aware of. Your unit price when you have a PLU selected, and the total price that does the calculation based on the weight and the tare. On this side of the screen, you will have information related to PLUs if they're set up, main groups that will have PLUs listed inside them, functions if you set them here, and just basic singular PLUs that will pop up when you select them. You have the unit price that gets put into the window here if the item has that, and the weight for the item when you put an item on the scale, and the tare if it has that value. If it doesn't have a tare, you can manually enter a tare as well. When you remove an item off of the scale on a manual mode setup, it will clear the PLU, and that's one of the settings in the user setup that can be changed if the customer wants that to remain on there. It all depends on the certain site and what they need and their desires, the way they want it to be set up. Back to the tare value, let's say we put a tray on the scale that weighs 1 pound. Obviously what I put on there is not going to be a normal tray. We just hit the tare key. When you press the tare key, it then removes the weight and shows the net value, and the tare is now in there. So you have your tray that's on there, you take your tray off, you're now going to show a negative value, and when you put your product back on there with the tray, that tray value will be reduced out of the weight automatically. So when you pull up a PLU, the price will change and be according to whatever that weight is and that tare. When you put a manual tare in a scale, it stays even when the PLU is removed because it's separate from the PLU. I believe this setup has it to where it clears automatically after a period of time. Normally it would remain until you press the C and then the tare. Right now it's going to give an error because there is no tare in here to clear. C is like your clear button. You pull up a PLU, you can hit the C key to clear, or when you pull up a PLU, you can hit the X. You're going to notice over here your numpad with various symbols and letters. Of course, you have your 78964561230 to where you can enter in a PLU that has a maximum value of 6 digits. So if we know what our PLU number is, normally it's going to be up in this corner on these buttons. You press 2 and then press PLU, and it will call up a PLU so that you can print a label. You have your C as stated as clear, your tare key. If something's left on the scale overnight or the scale gets booted up with something on the platter that's light, you'll see a value in this weight that's separate from the tare. With the zero function, that would make it incorrect. We just need to hit this button here, is your re-zero function. You'll see the lines come across here, it'll clear out, and then it should reset everything back to zeros. In the case that it doesn't and it gives you an error, you have to reboot the scale, and if that also does not function, you need to do a recalibration. There's an error with the scale platter and or the scale itself that needs to be cleared. You have this X key, which is a quantity key. It's not like an escape or anything like that. It can confuse the customers. So when you are installing, just make sure you clarify that this is an X key. so that if you're dealing with an item that is by piece, you can put multiple items on there so they don't have to print off multiple tickets for the same product. Say it's one piece of chicken for $2.99. Let's say they get 3. Instead of making 3 labels, you just hit the X key and then press the number 3, and it will put it into the quantity section, and then we'll add it and multiply and add it to a single ticket. Your PLU button is what you use to call up your item when you put in the PLU number manually. Press the 2 PLU, it will come up. You have the roll of labels with the arrow key stating that this is the feed key. Right now there's no paper in the printer, so you're going to get errors that pop up. Not all the time will these errors make sense for what you're doing. It won't necessarily state exactly what the issue is, so you just got to understand when you're operating on these scales that certain errors will pop up if you don't feed the label after you close the door and the setting is not turned on for it to do it automatically. You'll have to press this feed key to allow it to operate. This asterisk with the underscore is the print key. So when you pull up a PLU and you need to print this PLU, you hit this button here and it will print that label with that price and any other information on the label. You're going to see in this section over here in the top right, these are the function keys that get set up on the scale. Currently we have the home key, the manual pre-pack key, label format 1 and label format 2. These will change from site to site, and you will likely get the information on what the customer needs and desires prior to the installation or during your install, to where you can easily set these up. And in one of the following videos will be about setting up preset keys for both the primary section here and the secondary section here. These keys down here will never change, they will always remain the same, and the layout will usually remain the same as you're currently looking on these models. Most models follow this general setup in the 5000 series, but these are the newer versions, so they have a little bit of a difference since it's the full touchscreens and the first of that line. Going over these individual formats, this home key brings the display for the operator back to this base level. So let's say we go into a main group with like this all PLU button, it will bring up a list of PLUs that are in your scale, and there is no back key, so you can't go back from this screen. So you can't get back to the screens you have on the front or any functions. You would press this home key and it brings you back to the home screen. That's what this home functionality is. You can set this up anywhere on the left side, or you see these 2 bubbles, meaning that there's a second set of functions on here. You can have any number of function pages, I believe up to 7 or 8, possibly more, but you'll never have more than 2 or 3 potentially, depending on the site and exactly what they need or require. It's the same way for the primary buttons in these pages. If you have multiple buttons all the way across the screen, you can slide this over and have multiples on the next screen. You'll only see the bubbles if you have functions or PLUs on the following pages. You have the manual prepack key, where you go into prepack mode, which puts the scale in a state to where you print off a by count label, which is by piece. It will continue to print that label until you hit the C key to clear to stop it, or you clear the PLU, which is a second press of the C key in prepack mode, because the first stops the prepack printing and the second clears the PLU. It works the same way with a weighted item. You bring up the PLU, you put an item on the scale, it will automatically print. You take the item off, you put another item on, it'll automatically print. Once you're done, hit the C to clear it out, or they can just easily hit the manual prepack button and bring it back to the manual mode. Most delis and meats and other departments will use the manual and prepack mode in the prepack setup. It's the easiest one to not have to continuously press the print key, and most of the times you're dealing with product that they're putting out in bulk, and it really helps in that regard. As you're noticing with this model, the setup for the function keys change whether or not you're in manual, prepack, or idle. Idle means when you are not within a PLU on the screen, there's nothing here. This is the idle state. When you bring up a PLU, this is the PLU state, and you're noticing that our functions have changed as well, because based on being inside of a PLU, you need to be able to say change the sell by date, change the unit price, change the formats for this particular scale setup. So if we wanted to change the sell by date, we would click sell by date, and you'll have a whole new list that you'll just get accustomed to where the number of days that you want to put from today, if you understand that information, or you can click this calendar button and say, oh, this is bad by Tuesday. It'll put the number of days in here, and then you hit OK or the star. And now your label with your sell by date will now print this date instead, as long as that information is on the label. Again, a lot of the information for the label has to be added to it, which we'll go over in a following video as well. You can then change the price of an item. Say a price wasn't updated and the RSM or the operator or manager that deals with changing the price at the scale level forgot to change this price, and they sent them a text message or a note in the deli department. They can change the price as long as they're allowed to, and then hit that print key, and then it'll print that label with the new price based on the weight of the item. Label format 1 and label format 2 are unique formats, function keys that allow you to change the format on the fly. For example, if I press this label format 1, we have format 1 here and format 2 for the first label. Format 1 is indicating the first label. Right now these are just copies of themselves, but if they were two different types of labels, where one has a safe handling label and the other one doesn't have safe handling but has ingredients, they can swap between these two on the fly, and based on the information set up in the PLU that's on the scale, it will change the information on the label. So for now we're just going to go ahead and hit the X key. And label 2 is a second label, and if it's set up in the format section, you'll be able to select the second label to print out with the first label. Sometimes it could be an image, sometimes it could be instructional information. It all depends on the site and what they need. A lot of times it's a large ingredient field for them to put as much information as they can within the first label and the second label for the health department and the agricultural department, if there's anything dealing with like a packaging plant and things like that. As you can see, when you go into prepack mode, it also changes. These are the default settings that are on scale when you load them up usually. Log in and log out aren't necessarily used very often, but you always need to have a maintenance button so that you can access the menu. From here, we'll be following information in a following video, so to understand the menu, the reboot, and the turn off function. So that is your overall understanding of the operator screen, the format buttons, and the way that formats function, and the keypad for using a SM5300BX scale.